right, hello again. We're back today with a new stream on the AI show. I am Diksha, your host.
Hi, and I'm Sophia, and this is the AI show where we talk about founders, builders, and leaders across Asia and Europe because that's the reality of building here and it's quite different from the narrative that we're seeing out of the Silicon Valley. And this week might be the best example that we've ever had. What do you think?
Totally. It's been a crazy week. And obviously today we've got two stories, even though we want to cover a lot of exciting updates from Europe. And some of them are not so exciting actually, and even from Asia, the Chinese models and the success. But we cannot get started without discussing what's happening in the US, right? So today we've got like two big stories that broke everyone's timeline, right? The first one is Palantir CEO Alex going on CNBC on Wednesday and absolutely torching the way AI is currently sold. And the interview was quite heated and interesting, so I really liked it. And the second big story today that we're going to be covering is one of the, I mean, you could say that it's probably one of the strangest things that you or I have seen in tech, which is about the Fable launch. I mean, obviously it's back now, and how we got it back this week, and the government that eventually allowed it, and this probably the first time that something like this has happened, a tech model being given permission by the government, and it's going to be interesting to talk about that. And it also makes me wonder how frontier models are becoming these dual use goods licensed by geography rather than so openly. And like I said, this is probably we're seeing for the first time happen. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. It's crazy, and I've been abusing it already. Fable 5 is my favorite. But yeah, a lot of things to cover this week, and like how we'll follow where the money is going because there is a massive capital flip happening where profitable tech companies are cutting over 100,000 jobs this year while spending more than that they've ever spent in history, and those things are kind of connected. So. And after that, we'll close with why Europe has decided it wants out of this whole dependency game and what that means for everyone watching this show from this side of the world.
Absolutely. I think we have a lot to get through today, so let's get into it.
Let's dive in.
Awesome. We have obviously the first exciting update. Like I said, on Wednesday morning, Palantir CEO Alex, he went on CNBC Squawk Box, very exciting interview. He was obviously booked to talk about the new NVIDIA's partnership Palantir NVIDIA partnership. But yeah, he actually pivoted quite a bit into like a full-on critique of how the big AI labs, and he definitely like named them, or I guess he didn't specifically kind of sell their product. And his exact words were that something has gone completely wrong, right? And I think he did talk about the need of more open source models in the US, and he kind of claimed the mood among American enterprises right now is, and he talked about a very interesting point here, which is how Anthropic and OpenAI still kind of operate without an ontology, which is something that enterprises kind of need. Without that, they can't really trust the system. And and then he went on to say that, I'm quoting him here, that they'll chillax and waste their time with tokens, get no value, and hand over their IP. That's what like enterprises will be doing if they continue to use it. And yeah, what do you have to say about that conversation? It was kind of stressful on Twitter after that.
Yeah, it was very tense, and a lot of people on the internet actually supported his views, and
Yeah.
that's very interesting.
You're right. You're right. A lot of even like a few entrepreneurs from India I saw kind of like supported this view, and the need of the open source models, and how we kind of like really need to be careful about what AI enterprises are using. And I think he made a great point. Echoing what Alex said is, it's not just about the model that you're using; it's about application layers, the ontology that enterprises eventually have to build, and even the compute, and all three layers have to kind of come together. So all right, so let's unpack a little bit deeper into like what he's actually arguing about and what does this mean. And I also want to give our viewers the contrary view of what he was saying, and just to like kind of talk about both sides, to be honest. So his claim is that the token model, where you pay per unit of AI usage on someone else's infrastructure, in this case of Frontier Labs, has a structural problem for serious enterprises, especially people who are building, warfare, or are in healthcare, life sciences, and even otherwise, right? And the costs keep climbing. The value is hard to kind of measure, and worst of all, you're running your most sensitive workflows through a vendor who might learn from your industry and eventually enter it. And he says that, they're just getting your alpha, right? The edge that you have. He kept coming back to the fact that the proprietary knowledge, which is what he calls alpha, right, makes it win, is being shared here, right, which is super important. And that technical customers want control over their compute, their models, their data stack, and that proprietary knowledge that they have. They obviously don't want anyone touching that, right? And they want to know they own the means of production from end to end, which, notice is precisely what Palantir now sells through that NVIDIA deal, like I mentioned, sovereign deployments where the customer keeps the weights in the data. So he was kind of like making a point, towards his upcoming product that he's working on with Palantir, which is interesting.
Yeah, and that's where we need to be fair, right? Because Palantir is very much a participant in this whole fight, and it was a very well timed one. That NVIDIA partnership was announced like 2 days before the interview, and Palantir posted a 9-point manifesto about AI sovereignty on X the day
I
before
saw
the
that.
interview. Yeah, it was. What is that? And then Palantir stock closed up nearly 8% that day, the day that this interview actually aired. Close to 8%, it was 7.77. So none of this was random, and it was definitely not an accident of scheduling, I believe. It was marketing loudly and effectively, and it did the work. And I guess like being a salesman and being right are compatible though. So let's test the argument rather than the man. Where he's on solid ground is that the cost anxiety is real and well documented. Enterprises nowadays everywhere are dealing with AI bills. They grew way past the projections that they had in the beginning of the queue. And there is a broader industry conversation happening. Even Microsoft's own CEO has joked about being addicted to token maxing. Come on, even I'm addicted to token maxing.
Yeah, everyone is. And I mean, this is what we covered on Monday, right? Like
Yeah.
we talked in detail about how they're really focusing on new kinds of architecture to kind of optimize their costs and spend on AI. So this is definitely a very, very solid argument, like you said. But I do feel that the IP claim, I don't know how that really works, because we might have to like get in touch with some of the leaders out there. But based on what I understand, here is a detail most of the coverage kind of like missed, even on Twitter. And this is a bit of a contrarian view, right? If you really think about it, the data question is something buyers should ask their vendors, and they already do. Things like, are you keeping the data? Are you going to enter our business? He actually asserted that any name lab is taking customer data. I mean, and the labs would point out that the enterprise contracts generally don't train on customer data by default, and that zero retention arrangements exist for big clients. Now, I'm not sure how that the arrangement works as of today, but if you actually speak to some of the biggest enterprise servicing companies, this is like their IP clause that they always have. It's a standard. They can't really use their data to train other models or to kind of like work on different projects and even to use it in any other way. So the strong version of his point is about incentive, which I totally get, and trust rather than like a data theft here, for lack of a better word, because I'm not sure if that's like an actual loophole given how enterprises contracts are framed, at least today. So I think that argument is a bit shaky if you look at it. But yeah, we do need to understand from enterprises how would that work. Even though he kind of mentioned that most of the American enterprises kind of like echo what he mentioned.
Exactly, and but that's why the trust question is still so important here. And the story we can bring up as an example is Figma. So let's walk through the timeline. In February, Figma and Anthropic are partners, actively collaborating on a feature that brings Claude generated code into Figma. On April 14, Mike Kruger, who was Anthropic's chief product officer at that time and also sat on Figma's on Figma's board of advisors, as far as I remember, resigns from that board. And 3 days later, on April 17th, Anthropic launches Claude Design, a product that generates prototypes, slide decks, even marketing pages from tech prompts, design systems from scratch, and I've personally used that. And in other words, a product that's aimed at design workflows. So Figma stock dropped around 7% that day, and that
Yeah.
was like a whole new thing for the market. And it's just like something that was kind of obvious to some players, but then on the other side, like, why do I trust this company to be my partner? And yeah, how this data is being actually distributed and how it's being stored.
Yeah, I remember that incident. That's a very interesting one to bring up, and it, I guess, didn't catch so much fire back then because it just like looked like a partnership gone wrong, or maybe like not in the happiest terms. But I think you're really right in mentioning it here that it's definitely a trust problem, but that's not something that is new to the big tech, right? That has happened before, and
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, just for our listeners, this was never reported directly or publicly by Figma or anyone from Figma. It was just like something that was covered in media. That's where I saw that, and I think that's where you saw that. And obviously, it happened in like a closed event when
Yeah.
when the Figma CEO was asked about it, and he did mention that it was not a lot of no, I forgot what he mentioned, but then he kind of mentioned something around like there wasn't a lot of trust around that, even though the plan was to launch it together. Now, don't get me wrong. I think it's really, really healthy to be competitive, and to have like as many design products and as many cool products around design, AI products around design for our designers to use. And it should be totally healthy. But it's just that around the partner trust, the point that you mentioned, this is important. That where is this going? I also want to like give a contrarian view, like I said, that it's not new to big tech. So it's not like it's happened for the first time, and it's not going to be for the last time. So, but it does kind of like fit some kind of pattern. What do you think?
Absolutely, it fits into the pattern that we've been tracking with Anthropic specifically, because the company has been expanding from selling models into selling products. And I think it's kind of genius. Cloud code for developers, cloud design for visual work, cloud for life sciences for researchers, plus some security tooling. Each launch lands on territory where other companies, sometimes even partners, as we already mentioned, were building businesses on top of Anthropic's own models. And when Claude Design, when the news about Claude Design broke, it wasn't just Figma stock that dropped, but also Adobe fell as well. And Figma now has an activist investor publicly pushing the board to reassess the whole Anthropic relationship.
That would be interesting. I've read reports around that too.
Yeah,
And I think that's, like I said, it's like a US big tech arrangement, and that would like continue to happen. But for the rest of the world, and especially for Asia and Europe, the question for every founder builder watching this show probably is to kind of like they should sit with is the one Palantir is exploiting, that angle, which has some kind of weight for sure. If your model provider has perfect visibility into where value gets created on its platform, what actually stops it from entering a market once your category looks big enough? That's the question they're looking at, and that's totally valid. And notice you don't need a will and villain for that question to matter. It's like a structural feature of the platform relationship, which is also why when the big labs argue that powerful open source models are dangerous, some people now respond by asking, okay, dangerous to whom exactly?
yeah,
Is it to enterprises? Is it to users? Or is it to a certain pricing model or a business model? And that's a question that they need to address as well, and kind of like deep dive on. But again, I want to be like fair here. When you call that dangerous, there is some amount of truth in there, because open source models are not as strong as closed source. So there is that, at least not yet. And since in open source models, you can see all the reasoning behind the model, anyone can see it, right? Like that's the entire point of
yeah,
open source, even if it's 50% open source, or even if there are multiple clauses around, like you can't use it for public use, etc. I mean, that's what we've like seen on a lot of other tech products. But people can still exploit it and build capabilities that cannot be reversed, and that's, I would name it dangerous, right? And we're
yeah.
talking about dangerous use cases here, just to be clear. And there could be other cybersecurity risks that I don't want to get into, but there is definitely a point here when they say that open source models are not as safe. So that's an interesting point, and yeah, that's why I wanted to give like both views to our readers, because if you actually see on Twitter, it's mostly like bashing Anthropic kind of narrative.
Yeah. And to be honest, like it's genuinely an open question from my side. It's just both arguments are real arguments, and they both have solid ideas behind them. But maybe we'll come back to it later. And let's talk about the story that made this week historic. Uh,
Absolutely. Let's
yeah,
bring that up.
around
I
yes,
mean,
Fable 5. Fuck yeah,
it's historic in its own way for sure.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, I want to start this with lots of good news, especially for people who use Claude. Fable 5 is back this week online worldwide, and after the Commerce Department lifted all its export controls, and Anthropic even threw an extra usage for paid plans, I guess, as an apology. I see it. So on the surface, crisis over, everyone kind of move along. How are you
Except
seeing this?
yeah, except nobody should move along. I'm super excited because I think that think about what that sentence contains. An AI model, a thing you access through a chat window, spent almost 3 weeks under export controls, the legal machinery American normally uses for fighter jet components or enriched uranium. Come on. I've been in the tech coverage for over a decade now, and a chatbot needing an export license is genuinely one of the wildest sentences I've ever had to say, and especially on this show.
That's that's a way to look at it. I mean, that's quite an interesting way to look at it. I mean, quick version of what happened, just to like cover it all, is because the details kind of shape how we read it. I think around mid-June, Commerce Department kind of ordered Anthropic to cut off Fable 5 and Mythos
Yeah.
5 for every foreign person on Earth, including the company's own foreign employees, even if they're sitting in SF. Anthropic said that it had no way to filter by nationality on short notice. I mean, that kind of went viral, and so the models went dark for everybody, everywhere. And the state of concern was there was a reported jailbreak apparently unlocking offensive cyber capabilities. And Anthropic kind of disputed that quite hard, saying the evidence it received was verbal, the flaws in the demo were minor and already public, and the rivals models could find the same things with no jailbreak at all. So 2 weeks of negotiations, I guess later, the controls are gone, and Anthropic agreed to security commitments, and here we are. It's live and it's on. But
So,
how do you
yeah.
really unpack this further?
Well, for me, the interesting question is how to actually think about this now that it's resolved. And I would say that there are three honest readings that we can all hold at once. And reading one is that the system worked. A credible security concern came up, the government acted fast, the company patched the filter and made commitments, and access came back on within 3 weeks. If you believe frontier AI genuinely carries cyber risk, this looks like a functioning safety valve. And I don't know, like reading two would be what?
Yeah, I mean, it's the process. It's just the way it happened,
Yeah,
and regardless of what the outcome is, just the way it happened, and is it worrying for people or not? And are other countries kind of taking notes or not? You know, this all happened through private letters to one company with evidence the company says it never saw in writing, and legal analysts
exactly.
calling it the first time API access to a model has been treated as a controlled export. So I think this is just the way it happened was a little black boxy, and
Yeah.
I just don't want like other governments to really like repeat this, and it should be I guess more widely shared the reasons, and if it was a real cybersecurity risk, then of course, like you said, it's the right thing to do. And what would be the third takeaway here from this entire episode, in your mind?
Well, I think that reading three, I would say, is that for our audience that are watching from Berlin, Bangalore, or Jakarta, whatever you think of the merits, if your product runs on an American frontier model, you just watched a live demonstration of the access that's vanished overnight by a letter, with your status page having nothing to say about it, and the Q switch went from a thought experiment to a documented event with a start and an end date, and I believe that's what happened for the past 3 weeks. And the French telecom Orange put the European reaction perfectly, actually, saying that it's clear now that Europe needs an AI that will never be switched off on a whim. And it was a UK prime minister or one of the ministers that posted that the whole episode proves access to AI capabilities is now a sovereignty question for Europe.
That's a very interesting story. This entire Anthropic and the Palantir points that we raised. It's very interesting for Asia and Europe, and especially for Europe, because this is the frame, right? Because the practical takeaway for builders here in these regions watching is, I would say it's boring, but it's super important. Model dependency is now a line item in your risk register. And the same way cloud region outages and payment processor bans already are. So multi-model architectures and fallback plans, they need to be like really on the top of your agenda, right?
And that's the thought. That is the perfect setup for our Europe segment later. But first, let's follow the money. The 2026 tech economy is producing two completely contradictory headlines at the same time. And this week, we finally got data that helps explain how both can be true at the same time. Headline one was more than 113,000 tech workers are being laid off this year just by mid-May. That's roughly 825 people a day, which is huge amount of layoff, but mostly by tech companies that are actually profitable and growing. So that's the headline. And then the headline two, a brand new study out of this Tuesday, I believe, showing that companies investing heavily in AI are actually hiring more people, including juniors. So that's so contradictory, but what's happening?
It is. I mean, this has been like a topic that I've been like really interested in, because it's being discussed in closed rooms and also in open rooms. And we do want to get to eventually the Europe side of things and how they're tackling the entire AI side of things. But just to cover the layoff side first, which is super important, right? Because the scale deserves this space in this segment. The four biggest hyperscalers, Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet, and Meta, have committed somewhere around 700 to 725 billion dollars in capital spending this year, close to a double last year. Almost all of it for AI chips, data centers, and power. Right. Obviously, Meta cut about 8,000 people, 10% of its workforce, in the same breath as gutting too much as 145 billion in capex. Obviously, Oracle cut tens of thousands of roles last week. I guess we reported it, but what's happening in Europe, because we haven't really seen some of these figures and some of these inside stories, because most of the coverage that we hear about layoffs is primarily from the big tech in Silicon Valley, right? Like whether the layoffs happen in India or in other places, but they're primarily like a story in the US, right, of the big tech. Tell us about what you're hearing in Europe and in countries in Europe.
Well, what I'm seeing, like personally, coming out of Eastern Europe is that, and within that story, we're seeing huge layoffs happening here as well. As you mentioned, Oracle being in the tens of thousands of people that are laid off from there, but we also see Bosch, one of their biggest engineering operations is based in Eastern Europe, also closed completely operations, firing over 660 people. And we also see some commitments like from TikTok. They're planning to do something similar for around more than 300 jobs in Dublin. So to my point, the pain has been landing on a very specific group of companies. And Stanford's AI index found employment for software developers that are aged 22 to 25 fell nearly 20% since 2024. These professionals are concentrated in routine coding, testing, and bug fixes, while developers over 30 at the same companies actually grew in number. So it's kind of, again, very contradictory. And the door looked like it was closing, hardest on the people trying to enter that industry rather than those that have been a part of the industry for quite some time now.
Yeah, which is why when I saw the study last week, it was super interesting and kind of caused such a stir, because you're reading headlines and, like you're mentioning, even in Europe this is happening. And it kind of like the study is pointing the other way, and it does so with better data and almost anything before it. Like Ramp, obviously the corporate card company linked, actually has spending records from over 21,000 US firms to workforce data from Revelio Labs. So instead of asking executives in a survey
Oh no.
from 2021 through this, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean these two stories are striking. Any last minute thoughts you want to put on before we get to the Europe segment, which is going to be the super interesting segment, I feel.
Yes, for sure. Well, I think that the headline finding is striking, but at the same time, like companies that adopted AI grew headcount over about 10% over the past 2 years after adopting AI. And the part nobody predicted is early level headcount grew even faster, 12% to be exact, at the firms investing most heavily in AI. So the researchers' own advice to young people was, you're choosing between two similar companies, choose the one that's using AI because it's more likely to grow. And after 2 years of doom about juniors being automated away, that's generally a surprising sentence, because now we see that there is room for growth for people entering the industry. And it's exactly at those companies that are using AI the most.
That's a very interesting point that you just mentioned. Like, it's so important for for junior engineers to even like senior leads to kind of look at the AI adoption of their organization, because that's the real story, and that could be a strategy. If they're doubling AI usage and if it's like constantly growing, it might be an interesting place for you to grow, versus someone who's like extremely slow at adopting AI.
Exactly.
So that's a very interesting take there. All right, just moving on to how Europe is actually working towards an AI independency plan. I would say that. I think the honest number that I want to throw here is, because any conversation about European AI that's is kind of like skips it. According to Stanford's AI Index, private AI investment in the United States hit about $286 billion in 2025, and if you compare it with Europe's figure, it was 21 billion. So that's more like a tenfold gap that we're looking at, and it's the backdrop of everything else in this segment that we're going to discuss. So what is your view on how things are happening in Europe in terms of adopting AI?
Well, I think I think the honest reading is that we describe different animals here. So the layoffs are concentrated in a handful of giants doing very specific thing, cutting operations costs to fund the largest infrastructure build out in the tech history so far. So the hiring gains show up across thousands of ordinary companies using AI to do more with the teams that they already have, and then growing. And one analyst line made an impression on me. It was about the meta cuts captured the guy, and it captured the giant's logic perfectly. That you don't fire 8,000 people to save 2.5 billion when you're spending over 100 billion on chips. That, and you do it. You usually don't do that for any other reason but to signal that the AI bet is non-negotiable.
Absolutely. Do you want to like talk about all the way to what are the views from like Mistral, for example, because that's like a company that has been quite active in the Europe's AI ecosystem, and and how they're looking at the America's AI boom to kind of address some of the infrastructural gaps
Yeah.
that Europe has.
Well, Mr. CEO Arthur Mensch has been saying he has been saying Europe has roughly 2 years to avoid becoming Americans America's AI vassal state. And honestly, after the last month and after the Mueller briefly switched off the frontier model for everyone worldwide, that line stopped sounding like a startup pitch, to be honest, and started sounding like risk management. And even France's prime minister has said that flatly that the country can't rely on tools that are being developed by foreign powers.
Yeah, and I just read like really interesting stuff coming from Portugal, and there have been like lots of insider news in Germany as well, in terms of like how they're working on AI and robotics, physical AI, etc. And the responses move past speeches, to be honest, in Europe and declare concrete things that you can point out. Mistral obviously is doing a great job, and it's one of the leaders there, and kind of like really holding the flag. And yeah, I mean, recently building a data center out of Paris has been in the talks as well, running nearly 14,000 of Nvidia's newest chips, which is interesting. And overall, um, Europe has seen a record 35 new Nvidia AI supercomputers, which is super interesting. And yeah, the European Commission is funding what it calls the AI gigafactories, which is
Yes.
so needed.
Actually, yeah, we do have. I've been a part of several associations across Europe around the tech industry, and we see a lot of talks about which country is going to be the host for these gigafactories and who has the best suited resources to power this whole thing up. And that's what I wanted to add on what you said. Like the demand side backs it up too, because Gartner's research projects European sovereign cloud spending will nearly double this year to around $12.5 billion, which would be the fastest growth of any segment they track. And a survey found out that 61% of Western European CIOs are planning to shift more work to local providers rather than relying on foreign powers. And what's driving this, according to that research, is risk recalculation more than price, because which is, after everything that happened with Anthropic this June, feels almost understated.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. The price point you make here is quite interesting, because it's the weak spot, right? And this is where I think we got like stay skeptical. European data centers cost 20 to 30% more to run than American ones, between energy prices and permitting that can take years, right? The regulation side of things. And there was this like brutally revealing moment at Viva Tech where a Siemens executive asked a room full of European tech leaders or people how much of a premium they'd actually pay for European compute, and the hands mostly went up at 5 to 10%. So the gap between what sovereignty kind of costs and what buyers will pay for is kind of wide, and is real. And the open question for the next 2 years is whether the region ends up with their own capacity, or mostly are going to rely with like American infrastructure, wearing a more like trying to like wearing a sovereignty compliance wrapper on top of that, which is
Yeah.
also quite possible and is the upside of the story.
And we will be doing just half of our job if we did there, because for a lot of the world, and especially for builders in Asia watching this show, there is a third door in this story: Chinese open weight models. Remember Palantir's whole argument about owning the means of the production? Well, open weights are the most literal version of that. If you download the model and then it's yours, and the adoption numbers this year are striking because of that. Even I think it was Coinbase CEO Brian that said that the company cut its internal AI spending nearly in half by defaulting engineers to Chinese open models. And there is this reporting that Microsoft has also explored the hosted DeepSeek variant for some Copilot workloads. So I guess Chinese models have at times been consuming more tokens than American ones on the big routing platforms developers use. And in fact, they make up over 60% of the total API traffic on some of these sites. So that's very interesting to cover, actually, because these topics are being sort of overlooked when we talk about AI and the latest who's who. But all these stats are showing that there is a huge competition going on.
Yeah, it's a real race. Awesome. I think on that note, we have something interesting from Portugal this week, and they're launching the first open source AI model, joining the sovereignty push that we just talked about. So at least there's some progress. Anyway, the real map, as we see, based on the major stories today, has kind of like three clear roads. Whether it's like the American models, which are still the most capable, but come with metered pricing, platform risk, if you will, and now some kind of political risk, if you were to call that. Then Europe is obviously working on sovereign stacks, which offer control at a cost premium that buyers say they'll only partly pay, and that's only the beginning of the story, right? And then you have Chinese open source models, which is a huge part of the story and the most exciting part, because I feel China, along with the US, and even I would say even Israel, are like some of the biggest tech centers, and they kind of like are going to continue to kind of improve from here on. So yeah, I mean, this radical cheapness, cost effectiveness, and literal ownership with their own trust and security questions attached. Several governments have restricted them over exactly these concerns, but we got to see how they improve from here. Every company building with AI in Europe or Asia is now which one do they want to select, right? And what
Yeah.
kind of architecture they want to build for their own setup. So that's really the takeaway for the builders here.
And this week, we've seen that all three variables moved at once. Like Karp told everyone that pricing model is broken. Washington proved the political risk is real. And the CapEx numbers showed the incumbents are betting everything that you'd stay dependent on anyway.
Absolutely, that's definitely there. Anyway, I think this was quite a bit of
Yeah.
updates, and so much has just happened. And it's kind of wild to see how AI is moving every week, and there's so much happening at the macro level. And I feel that it's stopped being a tech story anymore, and it's more of like a market story or a capital market story. It's like moving markets, moving capital. Governments are involved, like I said, and they're like so many parts for builders and leaders to kind of think about. It's tough. But anyway, we're going to be back on Monday with more updates and we'd be diving deeper into some of the exciting narratives that you're seeing out there on the internet. For today, thanks for watching the AI show, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.